pretty rad.
I mean, if you get big
like
enough,
I said, I would do
people
that.
just
We're
pay
doing
you.
I would do this for free, and I am doing it for free.
Correct.
I mean, I'm getting paid, but
oh really? Who's
We
paying?
need to renegotiate our contracts.
I know, right?
1/3 of us is getting paid.
Sam's getting paid by George Soros.
I'm just like slightly subliminally pushing all his agenda. and
Yeah,
everything I
exactly.
say.
You know,
don't
I
even
just
know who
think
that
we
is.
need to. I don't even really know what the.
I just think what George thinks.
I don't think anybody knows what George Soros's
Not
deal
really.
is.
Yeah, they claim it. They claim it. The one the funniest George Soros thing I have seen though is when they're like he's died 6 times and has had like 4 different hearts or something. I don't even know if that's true, but they're like it's like he's a zombie man.
He's
like,
trying to keep up with Dick Cheney.
yeah.
I think
Okay.
he should start a book club with Terrence Howard.
How about for a start?
Okay.
This is slightly less political. Daniel, do you have any interesting or exciting new conspiracy theories? Especially if they're like something like
oddball.
monster related or
Yeah.
ancient aliens
aliens
history
related.
kind of thing.
God,
Egypt.
I've always got. Let me
Something you would like to share with the class?
No, I know. Let me.
I think
let
you
me,
have too many options.
consolidate. No, that is the problem. 'Cause
deal.
I'm like mainlining this shit all the time.
What's the most compelling or interesting or the sexiest? What one has to do
The
with sex?
sexiest one? Most of them don't have to do with sex. If probably
That seems very crazy to me that none of them have to do with sex.
Because most of the people propagating them are not really getting laid. That
No.
much.
But that's why I'm like thinking like they would
That's
be
probably
definitely.
one of the reasons
there's got to be
why-
a reason they're not getting laid. There's got to be a conspiracy.
Yeah,
I think they
that's
would
a
like
good
you
point.
to think that.
Okay. Let me go. I mean, there's always a few options. I wish I could. Some of them are just like shit posts. Some of them aren't real conspiracies, so it's tough to. It's like I'm so bad when I need something to like jog my memory. What
Well,
are those?
maybe let's open up and then we'll chime back in. It'll come to you.
No, I mean, look at my phone real fast.
And you have a note.
I need to start making. I mean, I need to like not start making notes.
Oh, you do that thing with the foam where you take all the color out of it.
Yeah, I do. I'm a weirdo.
That's a conspiracy. Talk about how your house is dark all the time.
It's not okay. It's not really a conspiracy.
I walk over and I'm like, Daniel,
Your house
in the
is dark as
shadows.
hell.
Yeah, and he sleeps probably better than we do.
Indeed.
You know what? It does make a huge difference. What's funny is like, I mean, maybe we can just do this.
I mean, my house lights are on right
Okay.
now.
I mean, and I'm being like bombarded by bright white light, which is fine for the podcast, but it's funny. Once
You're tolerating it.
Once you actually are intentional about your light environment, part of this is probably just like some sort of like OCD that I'm like giving myself. But like I try to sit in the sun in the morning when I can't, when I have time, or it's nice out. I'll try to spend at least even like 30 seconds outside.
Balls out.
Naked. I was gonna
Well,
say.
I do that, but not every day.
We've talked
not
about
every
your
day.
balls in the sun a lot.
I do that. But which I will say, there is a noticeable difference if you get sunlight all over. There are like noticeable psychological and physiological differences that you can very easily track to detect. But when you manage your light environment, either by like not having lots of artificial light on in your house, and especially not having lots on after dark, or having only red, you literally can like you can feel light on your skin, and you can feel how it is. Like this actually like literally makes me feel agitated because I don't like sit around bright light all the time. And also it's for the podcast, so it's fine. And like you want it to look good, and so it's like priorities. But like I literally like, and if I sit in bright light for like hours, or like I'm in the mall and there's fluorescent light, it's like you can do it. So I'm full-fledged like a total wacko on the whole light thing.
You should just bring sunglasses when we do this. Your red light glasses.
I actually have them in my car. Well, I'll put them on to drive home.
Yeah,
but
okay.
but yeah, I'll wear blue light blocking glasses after dark usually. Again, I got really anal about it for a while, and I've got less, but I've also tried to find a balance with it. So hey, get some sunlight in the morning, and then buy some red light bulbs. But the big thing too is it's not just that, it's the flickering lights. This is one thing I seriously think this stuff is a big deal, but the reason this is a bigger deal than it used to be is because all bulbs used to be incandescent, so there was no flicker. But most LEDs flicker. So like literally, if you go into your iPhone or your other phone, and if it's got a slow-mo mode, you can video a light bulb, and when it does the slow-mo, you'll see it's like flickering like crazy.
Yes, it is horrible.
And it actually like you're like especially if like that's all your light, you're literally spending like half the time in almost complete darkness, but it's so fast you're like you can't see it. But it's actually like very stressful on your body. So it's like when you're like you notice in some environments you get really like stressed out. It's because of your light. And I'm not the first one to notice this, but I'm going to be one of the first people to talk about it.
Certainly on this show. Hello, Mike Govanen, and today, Yokoso. This is the Undertowers podcast. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Sam.
We have a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking about, I'm not even going to say new, but certainly our continuing and our intensining love for anime and manga.
Yes.
And after that, we're going to be talking about our book club, which is what started this podcast. But first, we got a couple things of news. Starting off with some manga news. One of the beloved mangas that we are looking forward to starting to read probably next year, Vagabond, is getting the deluxe hardcover edition treatment. Similar to Berserk, which we've been reading, and like the new editions of Vinland Saga. And for those of you who don't know, Vagabond is written and illustrated by Takahiko Inoue, and it is the story based on the life of Miyamoto Musashi. Throwback to a couple episodes ago when we were talking about Brave Fencer Musashi.
One of the same
games.
And I believe that the first book should be coming out in January of next year. So
Lovely.
If they stick to a monthly release, they should all be out next year, but that's a big if. Next up, we got another tabletop news. This is not big deal for most people, but I found it very interesting. Steamforged Games, which is a smaller game company out of the UK. We'll come back to them in a second. They have acquired the Iron Kingdoms universe from Privateer Press, and that is mainly the games War Machine and Hordes. Technically, they're the same game. War Machine is lots of big, like fantasy mechs, kind of heavily armored dudes.
Yep.
And then Hordes is more like you're kind of. They don't have orcs, but what you would have like your less technologically advanced, more kind of traditional fantasy factions. And I've never played it, but my understanding, you could play War Machine by itself, you could play Hordes by itself, you could also play the two of them at the same time, lovingly usually called War Hordes.
Nice.
Steamforged has also acquired the P3 paint line, which I had never used, but I know a lot of people swore by. Now, I'm intrigued, but I have to talk about the elephant in the room, which again is only an elephant to like 5 of us out here. Steamforged Games, they made Guild Ball, which is one of, if not my favorite miniature games of all time. It's fantasy murder soccer. I don't know if you've ever seen that real life game from Florence that's like a cross between UFC and rugby.
I've never heard those 3 words put together.
Okay,
before.
well, we'll be watching
Fantasy
some videos.
murder soccer?
Yeah, Guild Ball's great. It was great. They killed it in 2020. It was a big, hairy, emotional deal.
Was it because they needed distancing?
No, it was because
Sports jokes.
Jesus
Barely.
Christ.
I just got that was about sports.
Or about COVID.
Yeah.
Social distancing.
Kinda, yeah, it was both and. Yeah.
Double.
But no, they had always said that the game had a shelf life. It wasn't going to be a game that they continued to make new stuff for forever because they didn't want to start repeating themselves. I'm sorry, this is boring for most of you, but please bear with me. But they just decided to kill it because, in their words, the fans were getting too good at it, or too competitive, and it was really stupid, and it angered a lot of us. But they are making an effort now to make amends for that. They're bringing Guild Ball back. They're working with the community teams that have kept the game going. So I do not have the emotional energy to stay upset about that sort of thing. So we'll see. I think it's cool. I think it's they they've have a good track record with actually making the games, the rules and everything, and in fact, War Machine was a big influence on Guild Ball, so we'll see what they do with it. Again, back to now news that is actually interesting to more than myself.
Tony, Ralph, and Pete will all be interested to hear that.
They will. Hey, I got you guys. We're in this together.
I mean, we're interested in Ralph, you know.
And then we got final piece of news. We got cover reveals for Joe Abercrombie's new book, The Devils. We haven't read any Joe Abercrombie as a group yet. I read his first trilogy and a few of his other books. He's
and it's
absolutely
not Joe
phenomenal.
Abercrombie of Abercrombie and Fitch.
No, it is not. It is Joe Abercrombie, Lord Grimdark himself.
It is just probably the age I grew up in, but every time someone says Joe Abercrombie, I just like see like a guy wearing in like a jacked young man in jeans. Just
well, fortunately,
no shirt, no shirt.
Yeah, jeans, no shirt.
Once we read some of his books,
the cover's out and it's hot.
He has some phenomenal characters that I think will help dispense with those ideas in your head. Along with the cover
I'm gonna picture
reveal.
all his characters as those guys.
Yeah.
All right. So along with the cover reveal, we got the synopsis for The Devils, and it goes. Europe stares into the abyss. Plague and famine stalk the land. Monsters lurk in every shadow, and greedy princes care for nothing but their own ambitions. Only one thing is certain. The elves will come again, and they will eat everyone. Sometimes the darkest paths lead towards the light, paths on which the righteous will not dare to tread. And so, buried beneath the sacred splendor of the celestial palace is the secret chapel of the holy expediency. For its congregation of convicted monsters, there are no sins that have not been committed, no lines that will not be crossed, and no mission that cannot be turned into a disastrous bloodbath. Now the hapless Brother Diaz must somehow bind the worst of the worst to a higher cause, to put a thief on the throne of Troy and unite the sundered church against the coming apocalypse. When you're headed through hell, you need the devils on your side. And that is coming, I think, just a little bit less than a year from now.
Interesting.
So love Joe Abercrombie.
Is that a series or is it just a book?
I think I honestly can't remember if it's just going to be singular. I want to say he doesn't write, or at least thus far, he's written a few standalones that are in the same universe as his original trilogy.
Sure.
I want to say that I heard that this was going to be at least a duology.
Okay.
Nice.
So,
Interesting.
But it is separate. It's not the first thing he's written. He wrote a quote unquote YA trilogy that is also excellent. That is outside of his original world, but this is also set outside of that original universe that he wrote, kind of in an alternate fantasy version of Earth, I believe. So
interesting.
Dope.
Definitely stoked for that. So that's the news for today.
Yeah, that synopsis was like it just kept. The more words there was, I was like, I just didn't expect the next word.
Well, and
Every
that's
time I was like, huh.
and that's kind of honestly how his books go, where it just keeps
Really?
escalating and escalating, and
Interesting.
and he throws in some wild twists and turns, and his character work is spectacular. So I'm super excited to see who he's come up with for this new story.
I like it.
So, anime and manga.
Yay.
So, as part of our book club that we'll talk about in the second half of the episode, we have been reading 2 mangas, both a seinen and a shonen manga, every month. And before we dive kind of into those specific things that we've been reading, let's talk about our journey into anime and manga, kind of similar to how we did the first episode with sci-fi fantasy in general. But because I know I had a much different path into it than you guys did, so I'll kind of let you guys lead things off here. What kind of got you guys into this world?
Like literally thinking about, if I try to think about the first time I watched an anime, it would be watching, I don't remember which was first, but it was either Gundam Wing or Dragon Ball Z. The memory is at my grandparents' house in South Carolina, watching it on either a summer or a Christmas vacay. Again, it's all sort of vague, although it probably was just actually at my house. But I remember they came on at 3 and 3:30 and then I think at 4 every day on Cartoon Network, and watched a lot of cartoons because it was the 90s and the early 2000s, and it those definitely like grabbed me in a different way, but they were DBZ. Gundam ended up being the one I loved the most, which I actually tried to rewatch Gundam Wing recently, and it's not that good actually. Yeah. There's still a lot in it that's interesting, but it's like slow in a way I didn't remember, and then also just yeah, just kind of weird. The original Gundam it's funny. The original Gundam I've also watched a bit of. It's awesome, but I also hated it when I was like 11 and 12 because I was like, this stinks. But it's actually rewatching it actually is way better. The 1980s 1980s original Gundam. But that's basically my entry into it. And then I watched a few other things. I remember watching the original Fullmetal Alchemist and mostly disliking it, but that was on Adult Swim. But also, like, I would only, because it came on so late, I would only catch like episodes every other, like, I had no idea what was going on. I just knew like the big metal guy looked cool.
A lot happens.
Everything else doesn't really, and then everything else doesn't really make any sense. But those are the only ones I can really remember, even though I liked a lot more than that. I would, I'm trying to remember. But then I lost track, and then I didn't really watch or take in much except something randomly here and there over the years. But then I got into Hunter x Hunter really big 3 or 4 years ago, and I absolutely loved it. And then also the Dragon Quest Hero of Die series, which
I wanted to mention Dragon Quest,
but yeah,
because
this is great.
Not just the show is phenomenal, but you know, I didn't have cable after about 7 or 8 years old, so I didn't get to really watch any of the shows on Cartoon Network or anything until I was coming to your house and watching them. But I think, speaking of Dragon Quest specifically, playing they called it Dragon Warrior on the Game Boy here in the States, but Dragon Warrior 3, Dragon Warrior Monsters, getting to encounter Akira Toriyama's art there first really paved the way a lot for me, I think, getting into manga and anime later on in my adulthood was I think a big stepping stone for me was those games specifically.
So in you saying that, not thinking about anime, my first anime and exposure would definitely be Pokemon.
Yeah.
Sure.
It absolutely would have been Pokemon. So yeah, that's a good time for you to jump in, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah, Pokemon for sure. Definitely the first one. Although I didn't know it was anime. Like it was
just on WB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was more about the cards. I think the cards got me, and I think that's actually kind of my whole experience of anime is like anything that I've liked or thought was like out of the box or like extraordinary or like a new world or some extra special things surrounding stuff I can kind of like trace it back to being related to an anime in some way, which is a humbling thing to think of. I remember I had a friend in Australia, and one thing he said is like, because we both liked anime, is like the first step in liking anime is accepting that half the world hates you.
Well, I think that's maybe one thing that we could try to help as we're trying to help make reading cool again, and maybe get it out to a different audience. But I think that I'd like to try to do the same thing with manga and anime, because I know I had some gross misconceptions about it for a very long time until I just gave it a try and started really delving into it as an art form and as a storytelling vehicle.
Yeah.
And it's silly because like I've always loved cartoons. And I never read a manga until 2020, but I grew up reading comic books, and for all intents and purposes, they're the same thing. You're just reading them in different ways, physically. But I didn't. I think in large part because of the cable thing, I never got into Pokemon. I'm enjoying getting my kids into it now.
Same. They love it.
The first actual anime, I was thinking about this and trying to remember back to the first anime that I recall watching, and I think actually that the first anime I ever watched was The Animatrix. Do you guys remember that?
I do.
That was the one like right before Matrix Reloaded came out, kind of.
Yeah, and it was kind of like bridging the gap a little bit. It was one of the extra things that they did. They did a game, a video game, and I think some comic books maybe. But the Animatrix is the one that stuck out. I know that there was a bunch of them. There was 3 that I still remember. There was like a straight up samurai battle one that was really sick.
Yes.
There was like a film noir kind of detective story that was really cool with the woman in the red dress. And then there was that like early hyper realistic CG with the dude and the lady dueling with their blindfolded and cutting each other's clothes off, which was very memorable for young Steven.
Yes.
But yeah, that was I think my first introduction to anime, and then it was watching DBZ and various Gundam shows with you guys. I think the Gundam I remember, I don't even remember what it was called, but it was the one where they had like the animal mechs.
Mobile
Suit?
Man. No, it's not. Yeah, maybe it is Mobile Suit Gundam.
Maybe.
That's
I
one
just
thing that's
remember it
got
was like they
pretty
had animals, but it wasn't like the big just Gundams that you think of. They were like all animal shaped, and I dug that.
Oh wait, no,
Hey, you're
that
talking
wasn't
about a different
Gundam
show.
I
Yeah.
can't remember
Wasn't
the name
it?
of that show.
No,
I thought
it was like
it was a spin-off or something.
No, it was a different
same
show.
thing.
But I can't remember the name of it. That show was pretty
Rick
good.
and
though.
Morty makes fun of it like pretty heavily in one of their episodes.
Nice.
What is that called? It's like they're like dragon sort of things.
Yeah.
No, but one of them was like a big panther.
Oh,
kind of
Jaeger.
thing.
Jägermeister, something like that. That was called like,
No, you're
It was Jaeger.
Jaeger's is Neon Evangelion. That are the Jaegers.
And
isn't that
Pacific
what we're talking
Rim.
about?
And it's in Pacific. Yeah.
No, I could swear that this was a spin-off Gundam show.
So it's a mecha. It was a mecha show, but it was animal mechas, and the main one was a panther.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And then it would get different things, but the characters
was
were
that
drawn, but then the
called?
things I can't remember what it was called.
It was pretty awesome.
But it was quite good. Yeah, that's it. Zoids. Yeah, that's it.
I didn't think it was this, but maybe it was.
Or I remember watching that. I think I remember watching it with
Zoids.
Anyways, this was like 20 years ago.
But there was Mobile Suit
25
Gundam, or
years
I'm not
ago.
remembering the name of it, but there was one Gundam where it wasn't like they were military bots as much, where they're like using joysticks and stuff, which is actually really hard to imagine. But there's one where they're like standing in it, and the Gundam is like interpreting their
Like Pacific
their
Rim.
movements. Yes,
Yeah.
like Pacific Rim. And then it's Gundams like fighting in a tournament in some post-world thing. And that one's actually quite good too. There's like a lot of Gundam.
There is,
out
yeah. And it's like I said, I can't remember which ones we were watching, but I dug what we saw. And honestly, the way that I actually ended up getting the whole DBZ story was we went to Blockbuster one day, Daniel, and we got, I think it was the first Budokai game. It's like the fighting game, and the story mode went through like the entire DBZ story.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we played that solid
Yeah,
for like
That game was awesome.
2 or 3 days.
Yeah. Back when you for those listening, you used to be able to go to a store and rent games and play them at your house for a short period of time, and then you would take it back.
Do you remember? There
And
was
you didn't finish the game.
Half the time you didn't, or you tried to finish it a lot, and you maybe did or you didn't.
Do you remember there was another fighting game that we got one time that was like, it was kind of fucked up thinking back on it, but it was like all it was like in a high school, and it was all high school kids just beating the shit out of each other.
Oh, and one was a baseball guy.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
that game was awesome. Yes, no, that game was actually awesome.
It was awesome.
And then it had really weird. Not weird is not the right way to say it, but it had very extended graphics for like certain moves. Like with the baseball guy, when you could hit a baseball at someone, but then it would you would cut to the field, and it would do this whole extended, really long animation, which I feel like is pretty common in games now. But I don't.
Well, it's very anime.
Yeah, it's very anime. But I don't remember ever seeing anybody do that beforehand. Again, there's another game I can't remember the name of, but
it was sick. It was awesome.
It was sick. Also, I'm
Soul
remiss-
Calibur, I have to say, is another game that kind of paved the way towards me getting into these things. Because, I mean, obviously, it's a Japanese studio making the game, very heavily Berserk influenced.
Sure.
I mean, Siegfried is he's
I mean,
straight up
he's
wielding the
definitely-
dragon slayer sword. So and I played those and we played those since Soul Calibur 1 on Dreamcast.
Well, and even Siegfried's alter ego is kind of like dark berserk guts
Sure.
too.
Yeah. And with the eye on the sword and everything, that's very, very berserk.
Yep. I mean, not to just keep listing things, but when Pokemon was also big too, I loved the Digimon show. I played a couple Digimon games.
was red.
I played a couple Digimon games, but the show is actually quite good, especially for like a for kids anime. The interesting thing about anime, we talk about this, there's a lot of great kids content with it, but then the thing with anime, and there's a lot I didn't like that was on at the time, but like a lot of it is actually for adults or for at least people that are more mature. It'll like it's stuff that really will go over your head if you're watching it and it's 8 and you like I remember Neon Genesis Evangelion was on when I was little, and I also the art didn't make sense to me. I didn't like it, but I watched the first season. I know there's like more stuff, and I don't really understand the whole Neon Genesis timeline where it's like redoing the timeline, but then it's the same thing. It's like I don't really understand how that works. Other people do, but either way, I watched it recently and it's really good. But I remember watching some of it when I was probably like 10 or something, and it was just like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, and like I hated the art. It made no sense to me. But even though it's a mecha show, because I'm like, oh, mecha's cool. It's like because I like Gundam, and it's like, oh, fighting fun. But it's like no, in Neon Genesis, there's actually like a lot of relatively sophisticated social commentary going on, and they're talking a lot about humanity and what it means to be human, and like how we can find meaning in society altogether. And it's a cartoon, but it's for adults. But in America, we don't really have cartoon for adults that's not like Family Guy adjacent.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's
potty humor, which
is great. I mean, South Park is one of
my
my favorite shows of all time.
Yes,
cartoon or otherwise. But yeah, there's not really a whole heck of a lot of adult animation around in the West that's not a comedy.
Yeah, I can't think of anything, to be honest. I'm sure there's something. And there's some animation that's like some of the Disney stuff is for kids, but like they want it to be for adults also, but
or at least enjoyed by adults too.
Yeah.
So what about manga specifically, branching away from anime for a moment? Yeah. I know like I said, I read comic books all growing up, and off and on through my adulthood. When I was a kid, it was all, superheroes and Star Wars.
Yep.
And then I started branching out as a teen and into college, started reading more of the independent stuff, like obviously the Frank Miller books. Sin City came out, watched the movie, fell in love with it, got all the books, read 300, yada yada.
Yeah.
Alan Moore, Watchmen, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Fables was another of my absolute favorites. But I didn't read a manga until 2020. I was wanting to start getting in, really deep diving into some horror literature, and every single list that I looked at that was like best horror books of all time had works by Junji Ito on it. And I picked Uzumaki because that was the one that was highest on everybody's lists. And I read it in one sitting. It's like 400 something pages.
Wow.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just blazed through it, and it was one of the wildest things that I'd ever read, and far and away up to that point, and still one of the most creative comic books of any kind that I've ever read.
Yeah.
Such a concept that doesn't seem like it should work. This horror thing that's based on this town that becomes obsessed with spirals. And he just delivered in a way that I did not expect. And that definitely kind of piqued my interest for the medium.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's one you've talked about that before, and I definitely want to. I'll want to experience that at some point because it sounds really awesome. But no, manga. I had never read a manga before until we did it as a group. When we started reading Berserk, then we read Full Metal. I've read all the available Berserk now, and I know as a group we've read through volume 12.
We're finishing it here this month in June.
It's been phenomenal. We're reading Hunter x Hunter now together as a group, and then we've already completed Full Metal, and I've loved that. And then on my own, since we got one of the subscriptions, I read on my own the Frieren manga because I loved the show, so I wanted to see what was available beyond. It absolutely blew me away. It's frustrating because it's ongoing, but they just went on hiatus again. I don't know for how long, but supposedly that's been pretty common for them. But although the one I reading it in chunks is so different than reading literally just one comic a week. So that'll be interesting when it's out. But then I've been reading the Yu Yu Hakusho, which I've seen that manga, which is also Yoshiro. I didn't say that right, but Tagashi, who wrote Hunter x Hunter, it's his first manga, and it's Yu Yu Hakusho is awesome because it's DBC style fighting manga, but like spirit world and demons and stuff, which is it's just really creative and fun. But but I'm almost done with that one. But it's been really fun, and like especially with like a subscription where you've got like close to unlimited. I plan on diving into a bunch of little things. I read the first chapter of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or whatever that thing's called, and it was interesting. I know people love that one, but I don't know how I felt about it, to be honest. But I'll probably go back. I'll probably go back to it at some point. But yeah, it's fun. It's really the way stories are told in manga and anime, because I mean they're really like joined at the hip. They're like kind of one doesn't exist without the other. I'm guessing manga's older. I guess I don't actually really know that.
I would assume
because it's easier to do, but the way they tell long form stories, and not always long form, but where they'll let a story be one thing for a very long time and it's still entertaining, but then there's, in DBZ there's the reveal, like, which everyone seems to know now, but Goku's an alien, or that there's this whole thing going on, and like, oh, actually there's like spirit powers behind this whole world, or oh, there's this whole thing, but it's like I know there probably are some parallels in at least probably some like American TV shows, and maybe some British TV shows are often not as long, but there's not something where they're like, hey, we're actually going to do this thing, and then oh, actually the whole real point of the story is this whole other thing, but you're going to have to read 100 of these before we actually talk about the other thing. It's really impressive, and you get immersed in a world in a different way than you do in a lot of other media.
We're going to come back to this because it's a point that I was kind of reading up before this episode of people's comments on comic books versus manga, and that's one thing that comes up. But first, before we get into that, Sam, what did you do any manga reading before we started?
No. I don't think I ever fully realized that there were books before. I
didn't as a kid. I had no
That's
idea.
what I'm saying. It was Pokemon, and Pokemon doesn't have a manga, does it? No.
I'm sure that there's some.
Yeah, there probably
but
are.
it's not. I don't think it's the same way.
It
where
feels
it's like,
closely linked to like the video game.
Yes.
But for all the other stuff like Dragon Ball Z, all that, I had no idea that it was based on like a book or a comic series. Like, so in reading any sort of manga, this book club is definitely the first like experience for me. Besides that, maybe comic books is what I feel like it might be like kind of comparable to.
For sure.
And
So
but I didn't even read comic books.
I didn't read comics growing up either.
So the Berserk would be the first one I think I've read. And
nice. Well, we've definitely have spoiled ourselves in
Reading
that
good
regard.
ones.
Yeah, it's a pretty good start, I think.
So going back to what you were saying, Daniel, about specifically about the long form of it, that was kind of, I don't want to get into, I think it's pretty reductive to like say one is inherently better than the other as far as manga versus comic books, quote unquote Western comic books. You could maybe make that argument about a lot of the mainstream in both angles, but one of the biggest differences, and I think one of the things that lends itself to the longer form storytelling of mangas frequently is that most of them you have the same author,
Right.
the same writer and illustrator, frequently the same person doing both jobs, which is astounding to me, for the whole run of the series. And frequently when it's done, as opposed to someone wanting to get into X-Men comic books, and where do you start? I mean that's not that difficult of a problem, because there's various arcs and restarts and blah 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 blah, but it's not like, even a series like One Piece that's freaking a million episodes long. It has a definite starting point, and someday it will have, I assume, an end. But it's all being guided by one singular voice, which means that there's a consistency and an ability for character development that is a little trickier in some Western comic book series. And that really is mostly just the main two, like the DC and Marvel superhero stuff. Because once you start getting into, the independent scene, you're frequently are not having somebody writing it and drawing it.
Right.
Guys like Frank Miller are more of the exception.
Right.
And even if you do have them drawing, you frequently have somebody else doing inking and somebody else doing colors and all that. But in the independent scene, you do frequently have the same person writing the whole story, which definitely helps with that ability to progress characters and stuff, that manga has maybe as a point towards it.
I definitely think Western comics, which I am not well versed in hands-on. I read some when I was a teenager, but nothing very seriously. But I think they are limited by the focal point of them being superheroes.
Yeah.
And it would be fun. It would be kind of interesting to talk to maybe a Japanese, someone who grew up in Japan or was Japanese and grew up with mangas. Like, I'm guessing most people are just aware that this is a thing that exists. Like, most people are aware that comic books exist, even if you've never touched one.
But there's, I think, one of the big cultural differences, and maybe this is where you're going, and I apologize, but comic books here, even with the big two, and even with the proliferation and the popularity of superhero movies and the MCU and everything, comic books here are still a pretty niche hobby.
Yeah.
Like the comics themselves, not the characters, but the comics. Whereas my understanding is that in Japan, not having been there myself, but talking to friends that have, manga is pretty ubiquitous. Like it's read by everyone. And it's a cultural force in the way that things like movies or TV shows are here.
I think that's right. And so then I do think the feeling there is going to be different, and the availability of artistry. I've just read some older comics, which are supposed to be great, but I've read a few American things, and just the dialogue is so terrible.
It really it's very highly dependent.
I believe it. I can't remember if it's Spider-Man or if it's X-Men, but there's a really funny, you'll see it like clipped on social media, but it's either Spider-Man or somebody in the front frame, and then in the back of it is like the pterodactyl man, and there's like the things like with your power you could you have the ability to shape people's DNA. You could use that to cure cancer. And then the villain's response is, "But I don't want to cure cancer. I want to make people into dinosaurs." and it's like,
so I think this kind of goes back to that same concept of one writer doing everything.
Yeah.
So like it really is the same thing with Western comics, where you have to, if what you're interested in is less the character and more the story and the dialogue and things like that, you're kind of chasing the writers. Yep. Similar to what you would do if you're following a mangaka in through manga and what reading all the series that this particular writer is doing. It just makes it a little more complicated, I think, sometimes in the big Western comics in the superhero world, where if you love Spider-Man, maybe there's going to be some more frequent valleys, because maybe it's not always the best writer that is attached to that series at the time.
Yeah, sure. No, it's tough, and personally, I've just got superhero fatigue really bad now. So there's just no interest on like personally,
Sure.
and no shame to people that want to spend time in either the movies or the comic books. I just have no energy.
Well, and
for
some
it.
of these characters have been going. I mean,
Yeah, for
you
so
look at
long.
like Batman; they've been literally going on since the 1930s.
Oh yeah, for sure. It is interesting also that comic books in America are almost always colored and are full color, very thorough, usually very vibrantly done. And manga is the other way around. It is always black and white, except with exceptions, basically for special editions.
Yeah, or like opening
Or
pages
one
of something.
sheet. Yeah, exactly. Which is very,
And that's a financial
very-
decision. I think it's
I
because
think-
they've got to
yeah.
pump them out. They're pumping them out much quicker, and
Yeah.
and it's one person doing it most of the time. So
but I do think that doing that way, even though a lot of mangas put a lot of, obviously they put a lot of emphasis on the artistry of the story they're telling. It's not just the dialogue and the other things, but there is by not putting the color, there's a little more emphasis sometimes, I think, on story than just the look of it, even though a lot of them, obviously the art is very considered and very thought and stylized in interesting ways. One of the other things I thought that's interesting is like you do the mangas we've read, at least you'll get some block text that's not dialogue, but that is much less common. I also feel like, where I remember in the little bit of comics I read, you get the where it's a
exposition
bubble, but you get
boxes.
like an exposition box,
Right.
And it's just like this is going on and this is happening and that, and then like you'll get updates through it. But like here, in Berserk, you'll get every once in a while, and like there's like the repeating motif of it was all just a dream, or like it was like they were in somebody's dream. But like you get that. And you get stuff like that, which is also like, it's sort of like a thought someone's having, but not quite.
right, it feels more like a character is saying it than
Yeah, and but it's sort of vague. But there's no like, and this is what is happening. Now I will say the Berserk deluxes, I don't know if those are included in the volumes, but there is a blur before each volume that's like, this is what's happening right now. But that's really just a summary.
Yeah, a little recap.
And they weren't even in the original
No.
the first few. They only, and it makes more sense with so much going on later in the series to have some of those. But but the other ones I've read, that's not going on and not happening. There's very little. Here's just some exposition, which is interesting because we've talked a bit about show don't tell, where manga feels very show don't tell. You're going to see the characters and what's happening in the world just by drawing it and seeing it and finding ways to evoke that. And I'm not even really trying to compare it to Western comics, but that you get a lot more of that.
I think that's really fun though to compare to Western comics, because it does seem like the Western comics, in my experience too, are just about the characters, really. Like what's it like if Batman's in this situation? What's it like if he's old? What's it like if just like all these different things surrounding a character, which is cool. But I think that the mangas we're reading and the mangas I've seen and heard you guys talk about is kind of just like a really almost open-ended, unlimited possible, like everything is possible and to tell whatever story you want to.
Yeah.
As long as you have the chops or the skill with art to match it. And to me, it feels like such a blank canvas, and that maybe that's why we get some of the most outlandish, amazing stories out of it, is because it's not like pigeonholed into a character or even a character trope. It's like, what can you draw? What can you think? What can you conceive? Make a story. And then we get like Hunter x Hunter or Berserk or Pokemon, or like just this immense world where like we have these little monsters that do what we want and we're supposed to be friends with them. Like, or Dragon Ball Z, like if you fight hard enough, you get to this level where you can kind of channel inner strength and make that come out. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
Well, we've
with
had
unlimited possibility.
we've had this conversation privately before many times. and speaking out of my ass a little bit, and also again kind of acknowledging that thus far we have read and are reading like, you know, three of the probably the arguably the best mangas ever written. So like definitely views on the subject are a little skewed, acknowledging that.
My feeling is that all mangas are very good.
It's every single one of them. There does seem to be just a wildly creative spirit behind the medium that I appreciate very much, and that is definitely, I would say, probably missing from the majority of the superhero stories. I do look forward to at some point we'll take a break from manga and read some of the indie comics, Western comics. Because again, I think for some reasons that we've discussed, there's a lot of wildly creative and incredible stories being told outside the beaten path as well. In Western comics, but it feels like both watching anime and reading manga, and even not, you know, outside of cartoons and comics, even just watching some, you know, movies and shows made in Korea and Japan, and there is a creative freedom, and I don't necessarily mean that from a production standpoint only, but also from a storytelling perspective, that it seems to be more freed from some of the financial strictures that put, you know, shackles on creativity here in the West, which is ironic considering that, you know, a few years ago, Demon Slayer, was it Demon Slayer?
It's Demon Slayer.
The manga, that one manga outsold every single Western comic put together.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's like, and I can't speak to Demon Slayer, I haven't read it, but it's just it just to me it kind of goes to show that.
Yep.
And again, maybe I'm totally off base here with what it's actually like writing these stories and you know, the production behind them. But as an outsider looking in and enjoying these stories, it seems like there's this wild creative freedom that is leading to some better stories, more exciting stories, that then in turn are making way more money and reaching a much wider audience.
There's just way less red tape around it. Like, I don't know, I'm torn about like creativity in that, and this is kind of a throwback to our genre thing, but like, I love that some of the greatest mangas are like one person and all of their ideas on paper, and maybe they had some people come along and help them get to where they're at, but like, it doesn't seem like there was a think tank or there was like character development with outside source other than like the person be like, what do you think of this person? And if they don't like it, they're like, I don't like it, I don't care, I don't have to do that. But if they do like it, they can add it. I mean, Tolkien's like that too. Like, you know, he had his group, he would like share ideas, but ultimately he's like, I think I want it to be Frodo. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of just love that.
One thing on that note, I think that's really interesting though, with the creativity and the, I mean, I guess it's like Japanese art and drawing culture, because we're talking both anime and manga. It doesn't feel like there are creative restrictions on what they're doing as often that there are for commercialization. I'm sure, again, that's one where I feel like that one might feel different if you grew up with it as like your main source of media, because maybe like I think like Dragon Quest probably feels very mainstream there, and it is very mainstream there, but here, well, like in America, it's very niche, so that's also different. But what's interesting with manga is there are lots of very specific types of manga, obviously with the shonen and seinen and all that stuff, but then there are fighting manga where like they're gonna fight all the time and it's all about powering up and it's that, but then you've got guys being very creative within this very sort of simple rudimentary form of just like usually like a young boy fighting and becoming like super powerful over time, but they'll get to this very interesting place with it. One of the things I think that's also very interesting, if you just compare not even necessarily comics to manga, but really like Western animation in general to like Eastern animation, I guess maybe is what I'd want to say there, but is that manga and anime, there is very serious, very adult, and very dark anime and manga, but usually even in those, there's like a lot of room for silliness. Even in Berserk, obviously you've got Puck like turning into a little chestnut man all the time and like pretending to be Yoshi.
God, you've got to have it.
I know, it's like, oh, for sure.
Otherwise,
But it's the same. It has the same
very-
tone as all the other silly manga.
Yes, there's a humor and a silly and an absolutely ridiculous silliness. You get the same thing in Full Metal. Full Metal is very dark in moments, but then there's like, they'll
call Ed short.
Yeah, they'll call it short. And they'll cut to but even in the art style, they'll cut to like little caricatures and they'll do the things where there may be an example of that in Western stuff, but obviously like more serious and more like beautiful animation. Like I feel like that died in the 90s.
It wasn't. I don't think it was the 90s. It was. You can actually in comic books at least you can really track it to 9/11.
Okay, that's
there
fair.
was a dramatic shift.
Yeah, but then, but even then, and I remember like in the 90s, you had the Gargoyles show, you have the Batman show, you have that.
But there was goofy characters in a lot of that stuff.
Well,
too.
and there were, but even then, the art for the most, there would be silliness.
But
in those
it didn't
shows.
like shift to the like little kawaii thing and like the goofy stuff.
They would just be silly, but it was all like very thematic, and then. In the late 90s, you get the shift to, and the shift is maybe not the right way to say it, but then Ren and Stimpy comes, and then you get Dexter's Lab, and you get that whole, I can't remember what they called it, but you get that whole movement of art, and then The Simpsons is probably the one that really started that, to be honest, because Simpsons goes back to the 80s. But it's a very stylized, very silly art style, which can't ever get serious, really.
Right.
And some of these cartoons because I mean, like you get then Phineas and Ferb, and then there's like stuff on that all ends up with Rick and Morty and all this other stuff. And I don't. Does Rick and Morty have emotional moments? Not really.
Yes, they do. There's some.
Okay,
there's a few episodes that are remarkably serious.
Yeah, but either way, you'll get that, but it can't. Rick and Morty is like. It is imaginative, but not really beautiful all that much.
No, I mean it's got a very
creative
style.
So I'm not even. I know a lot of people love Rick and Morty, so I'm not. This isn't really even to critique it. It's really just to draw a distinction. It's interesting that very often in and again there's a wide array of things here, but in manga and anime, a lot of them hold space for being very beautiful, very serious, and then also like extremely goofy and silly. And you just don't see that range often in the West or whatever. Now you do also get some manga or some anime like Gundam doesn't do the silly thing.
Yeah.
Like either. Not that it's always just
like
dead
ever.
serious, but they don't ever cut to someone making a crazy face.
Yeah, no,
Those,
it's
like jokey
very
stuff.
serious.
It's very serious, which is kind of funny because it is like it's mecha, which is like, but like mecha manga seem to be like that in general. But you get it's like
It's so
no,
serious
very
that it
serious
does
robots.
get silly at times.
It's almost silly how serious it is. I agree, but that's interesting. Also, we would be remiss to not talk about Studio Ghibli, and
for sure.
just how wonderful. I did not watch many of those. Ponyo was the first one I ever saw. I saw that actually in theaters and absolutely adored it. I did not watch any of those as a young person, so all my relationship with those films is as an adult. But some of my favorite films, just like bar none, Porco Rosso is an absolute triumph of cinema, and the pig man is like one of my favorite characters in a film ever. He's an Indiana Jones pig, and it's just like it doesn't get better than that.
That's amazing.
It doesn't get better than that.
I'm ashamed to admit I've only seen Totoro. We're about to start. My wife and I are about to start watching more of them because we want to, but also my girls both adore My Neighbor Totoro.
Totoro is awesome.
They love that movie, and we want to show them some more Ghibli, but we want to watch a lot of the rest of them before we watch them with them. Because I think my understanding is that Totoro is kind of the most kid-friendly.
Totoro is very kid-friendly. Ponyo is very kid-friendly. You might still want to watch it first, but honestly, they're so good. Watching them twice wouldn't feel bad.
No, for sure.
Porco is also one that's pretty good for kids. I mean, it is it's very silly, but it's very fun also. But then yeah, some of the ones that there is just some scary stuff for little kids that you wouldn't need to be like, you could watch them pretty young for the most part, but it would be if you were a not a sensitive kid. But I was a very sensitive kid, to be honest, where like scary stuff, like I would have nightmares for ages. But so like some things are just, it's best to have a little more maturity or a little more life experience before watching.
Yeah, totally.
Well, let's start tying this into the book club because manga and anime have, because of our interests, but also practically they have a very integral role in our book club. So the book club started really. We all just wanted to hang out again. We hadn't seen each other in a while, all three of us together, and
we watched Akira.
We got together and we watched Akira,
which was awesome.
Which was so sick,
crazy,
so good. We somehow all three of us had never seen it before, and so we agreed, like, screw it, let's get together and watch it. And so we watched Akira, and we were talking about Berserk, and we also were talking about this book that you had started reading, and that I had owned for a few years and not gotten past the first couple pages. And then that Sam was very interested in, called The Shadow of the Torturer, by Gene Wolfe. And we're going to return to Gene Wolfe in a future episode.
Yes.
So stay tuned.
What a start to the book club.
But it was that night that we decided, hey, we all we loved watching this movie. We love hanging out together. And we all want to read this book. So let's do it together. Do it together, and let's start reading Berserk too. So anime and manga are literally at the foundation of our book club, and thus are the foundation of this podcast in a way. So let's briefly, before we start moving into talking about the book club in more depth, we're in our third manga. We've read Berserk. We're finishing that this month. We read Fullmetal Alchemist, and we're reading Hunter x Hunter. And these first three ended up kind of being all three things that are very important to each of us. So let's talk about those three in brief, and we're going to keep this as spoiler-free as possible for anybody who hasn't read it. We'll maybe do some future episodes that are a little more in depth. But Sam, let's start off with you. Tell us about Fullmetal Alchemist, like what drew you to that, and what you felt, because that was your series that you brought to the table.
Yes. I really don't know how I started watching that. I think it was after The Last Airbender or something. I was like, that was good. I was just like Googling around what's a cool cartoon. And that like popped up as the top one. And just getting into the first couple episodes, it just felt like I was a kid again, like watching Dragon Ball Z for the first time. Like, what is this world? I don't know. Kind of for me, it was like a link for Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon at the same time, to have a world with like rules, but also this like kind of coming of age. The main character is strong, but not to his full potential yet. So it was like a kind of a Gohan thing for me. I was like, so it was just a kind of a thing I identified with at the time. Like, this is like all of this past I've had with anime kind of into this story.
And did you start with the original manga, or did you watch Brotherhood first?
I can't remember. I think it ended up being Brotherhood, but just the Seven Deadly Sins just messed with me in such a deep way. I was like, this is so cool to like have this. I mean, honestly, reading the manga this past year, I think kind of made the whole story come alive to me in a whole new way. Yeah, the moment with the Chimera in the very beginning, where the dude, I don't know if we can spoil stuff, right?
But it's pretty early on.
Yeah,
That's okay.
it's early on enough, and it's
where he turns his daughter into like a monster, all because of his ego and trying to like prove himself to his like peers. I just that to me still had. I don't think we've gotten dark. I haven't experienced anything darker than that in terms of like storytelling and like worlds, like the level you'd go to create a monster out of your own like flesh and blood to try to prove yourself. Like I was like, that's so messed up. That's another reason I love Gene Wolfe and Alzabos. But yeah, that would be my ink, like that made me, I guess, really interested, kind of like a spark for anime in general that was outside of Dragon Ball Z, Gundam Wing, and Pokemon.
And how old were you roughly? Were
I
you
think
an
I
adult
was
when
like
you started?
23, 22. Yeah. So I was like, wow, this isn't just cartoon silliness. It's like, this is next level stories, like Final Fantasy type
Nice.
things.
Well, I loved it. I went in completely blind.
Yeah.
I look forward to watching Brotherhood at some point in the future now that we've finished it. But I pretty specifically stayed away from watching, since I hadn't watched any at all before we started reading. I wanted to read the books before diving into the show. But I loved it. I loved the art. I loved the characters and the story. It's one right up there with Berserk that we'll talk about next. That the art was just beautiful the whole way through.
Absolutely.
Even when it was being supremely goofy, which was hilarious, and a welcome reprieve from some pretty dark moments. But yeah, I had no real expectations, I don't think, going into to Full Metal, and I absolutely adored it. It was phenomenal. Can't recommend it enough. And yeah, we'll do another episode in the future that we dive a little bit more into detail, and that will be a bit of more of a spoilery one than this episode. Yeah. Daniel, what do you have anything to add about Full Metal?
No, it's just really it's really fun and but also like you both were saying, it dives into some really interesting emotional depths, but also, as I am someone that like really kind of loves the whole alt history, conspiracy, occult stuff. I really enjoyed how it actually, like, its depiction. Obviously, it's kind of it's not quite a fighting manga, but there's guys with powers doing their things, and they're battling and doing stuff. But its actual depiction of historical alchemy, and then like you've got the whole, the Kabbalah tree going on, and it's like it's actually touching on some interesting occult stuff that it actually handles really well. So I appreciate as an appreciator of that.
So any closing thoughts on Full Metal?
No, I think that
Full Metal's awesome. We love
really
Full
great.
Metal. Read Full Metal.
It's really great.
Okay, so I brought Berserk to the table. It had been on my radar for a long time. Yeah, pour that.
I just wanted it to appear in a cut shot. Just a bottle of whiskey out of nowhere.
Heck yeah, dude.
That wasn't there in the last one, was it?
So yeah, it had been on my radar for a while.
Wait, what's this?
Berserk.
Yes, yeah.
And I just hadn't gotten to it. Frankly, it is a little intimidating to get into, because the books are not the cheapest thing in the world, and there's a bunch of them, and they're huge. But
I almost watched the anime not that long ago, but just kind of didn't do it.
Cheers, boys.
Cheers
to
Berserk and manga and anime.
And I guess the podcast.
But yeah, oddly enough, it was good timing, I think. Because again, it'd been on the radar for a while, and then kind of suddenly everybody on BookTube started reading it at the same time. And one of the channels I follow, shout out Daniel Green, he did a phenomenal video, spoiler free, talking about the series as a whole. And that kind of sealed the deal for me, where I was like, okay, I need to actually finally start reading this. And one of the things that he said that I will echo 100% is that it's not just one of the greatest mangas ever written, which is pretty universally accepted, but it is one of the greatest pieces of fantasy literature ever written. and I would not dispute that. Are we rolling? Is the sound rolling, Sam?
I think so. It's just not like rolling.
Let's double check real quick.
check.
Just because I'm not seeing the. Okay. Oh, there we go. I see. Okay. So, yeah, I would say that Berserk, I put up with other comics like Watchmen specifically as something that transcends the medium, especially now being here at the very end. I'm about halfway, 2/3 of the way through the second to last book, which to my understanding, I think the deluxe editions that we've been reading finishes at 14, and that's the final pages that Kentaro Miura
Yes,
wrote,
that is
my
correct.
understanding.
That is correct.
So I do look forward to reading the rest of it when it comes out in a physical copy.
Are some of them out already?
I think so.
A couple chapters?
I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure if they're available to read in maybe online somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're up somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere. But I fell absolutely in love with it. It exceeded every expectation that I had, which honestly for Berserk were pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
The art is unbelievable. I've never seen rage and pain and sorrow drawn the way that he could draw it.
Mm-hmm.
Just a master storyteller, and the way that, without getting into any spoilers, the way that he writes, especially those first few books where you go from present back in time, and then it's not just a flashback, it's a literal going back in time and then catching up to the present.
Yeah.
Knowing that something horrible is going to happen. And he set it up so perfectly where you know that these characters that you're meeting on the Return to the Past aren't there, and you know that something has happened between these two other characters, and it's bad. And it sets up this sense of dread through the next few big books, deluxe volumes, that just masterful storytelling. And witnessing, I keep bringing this up, and I'm not going to be stopping anytime soon, so everybody just get used to it. But the whole found family trope in fantasy, Berserk is a perfect example of it several times over, frankly. And witnessing Guts's journey reminds me a lot of Kratos, actually, in some ways. That very similar character type, and in some ways, not in every way, but in some ways, and a very similar kind of journey if you are familiar with Kratos' story from the God of War games from the beginning through to the modern games. Some very interesting similarities there, perhaps. But I'm so grateful that you guys agreed to go on this journey with me, because it has become one of my favorite things that I've ever read. It'll, spoiler alert, definitely end up when we redo our top 10 favorite series list, favorite sci-fi fantasy series list at the end of the year. It will definitely be on that list.
If only
this go around.
It was on Forbes' list.
But thoughts on Berserk?
You know, the one thing I've been thinking about, especially because I just finished the I've read everything that's available now in the last couple days, and the man is obsessed with pouty lips. You know, it's like he's like pout. It's like Griffith's doing pouty lips, Casca's doing pouty lips, Farnes is doing pouty lips. You know, Shirky's not doing a ton of pouty lips, and Guts is mostly not doing pouty lips. But he's like, it's like, I don't understand. It's like, it's a face that makes me a little bit uncomfortable at times, and I'm like, what is happening? It honestly came up a lot, but it's been in there in general. But I don't see that face being made in other. I don't remember that in other anime I've watched. I don't remember that in other that he is obsessed with that face. And again, I just don't know what's going on, and I feel like there's some like deep,
like the blue steel moments.
The little. I mean, and again, for the camera,
do it for the camera. Do it for the camera.
Oh yeah, the ooh.
There's a lot of it.
Yeah.
There
There
really
is-
is
yeah,
a lot
you're
of
not
it.
wrong.
And
You're
again,
not wrong.
this is not really a critique, but it is. I'm a little confused.
It's a stylistic choice.
I'm a
that
little bit
doesn't resonate
uncomfortable,
with you.
but I'm wondering: is there a deeper meaning? Is that just a face he likes? I don't know. I don't know what's happening, but there's a
I mean,
lot
I
of
think
it.
like
it.
it.
I actually, despite what I was just joking, I think you could say it did resonate with you.
It did.
And I think
It made an impact
especially
on
in,
me.
In
Yeah,
the,
like alarming.
I would maybe say that, especially in the case of Griffith making that face, because it is kind of a little bit of like a sexual face in some ways.
It is.
And
Griffith is drawn where he is more masculine than the other characters, but he's very effeminate,
yeah,
while also being
he's very
also
androgynous
not
in a lot
that.
of those ways.
Yeah, yeah, and
Androgynous, yeah.
and we'll probably talk more about it later. Griffith is a very interesting character, and I am not sure how I.
Yeah, we'll do
feel
some
about
we'll do some spoiler discussions here in the future.
Yeah.
Sam, Berserk thoughts?
Yeah, it's a story that keeps you guessing. I haven't figured out anything that's happened before it did in this story. I mean, it doesn't follow any sort of like normal structures. The flashback is supposed to be over in a couple pages, and it's like, no, we're just reading the history now, like all of a sudden. So, I mean, that's kind of a spoiler.
Well, you could almost say that it's not so much that it's a flashback as the very beginning of the story is like a flash forward.
Yeah, it tricks
No,
you,
it
though,
almost
'cause
is,
It doesn't
yeah.
seem like a flash forward. Like that
It's
seems
like
like a pretty common
yeah.
entry point to stories.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like something crazy went down, and now we're discovering the ramifications of it. But yeah, it doesn't follow like normal storytelling, in my opinion.
No, it does that really well. I am sort of, and it was funny. I remember we talked about this right about a year ago, but because the first deluxe edition ends with you starting the
Golden Age
the
arc.
golden age, which is
New way to say
the
age.
beginning of the flashback. That's not really a flashback. It's really kind of where your story like re-begins. But I remember being very annoyed that we were going back in time, assuming it would just
Yeah.
be a brief moment.
That's what I'm saying. Like
because
the
it's
way
such a
laid
trope.
out,
It's such a trope nowadays to do the whole
origin flashback story.
start and then flashback, or like the one that you see a lot nowadays that just I'm just tired of it. Is the whole like something's going on, and someone's dead, or this person is dead, and then we flash back and it's like, how did we get there? And it's just that's happened so much in modern media these days because again they're trying to hook you to watch to do the whole thing that it's like I'm just tired of it. That it felt like even though this came out in 1989 originally that they were. It's very obviously not doing that trope, but it felt that way to me for a moment, and I balked at it.
You're talking about This Is Us, aren't you?
I've never watched This Is Us.
I didn't either. Very
So-
specifically.
This
I
is
didn't
us.
know that.
This is us is actually an anime. First,
No, but I've been watching a show with my wife called Death and Other Details, which has been a lot of fun. It's Mandy Patinkin as a detective, and then a bunch of mostly other no names. And it starts that way, although it's kind of gotten past that now. And it's a murder, and it's like ooh, and then we flash back, and then you keep going. But again, it caught up with the murder pretty quickly, which was nice. But then both seasons of White Lotus have been that way, and I actually liked the White Lotus a lot. But again, it's just like I actually would have liked White Lotus better if we hadn't done the whole there's a death, just wait for it, someone's gonna die. I did think in the second season, White Lotus kind of put that on its head just slightly, which I thought was nice. If they make more seasons of that show, which I did enjoy, I hope they let's just go away from that. But again, I thought Berserk was doing something along those lines, even though it's almost 35 years old. But it wasn't. It was doing a whole different style of storytelling, where it was going to be like, hey, we are going to, and I guess it actually is semi-related, but it was going to do it in a very thoughtful and nuanced way. We're going to give you this whole progression of Guts beginning, and then he's got the brand. He has no rest. He has to fight demons and spirits that attack him all the time, and then he fights several apostles, and then from there, he sees the God Hand, and then we go from God Hand to major flashback.
I mean, even mentioning those, I think in the whole Berserk like world, it does seem like more hopeless than many other stories that I've like encountered. Like throughout the whole thing, it's like these guys are pretty much just all powerful.
Yeah.
And we're just gonna show you how all powerful they are the whole time. And then Guts will kind of do some stuff to like survive, but ultimately he's like a cockroach and they're like a nuclear
Yeah.
bomb.
Well, I think
It
that
is-
kind of mirrors Guts' journey, though, in a lot of ways too. Is like
I'm surprised that the whole world is like there's nothing you can do to actually win.
I was gonna
that's
say though,
unrelenting.
I was gonna say though that I actually think the first half roughly of Berserk is an interesting kind of character study on struggle and hardship and just fighting against all odds but like Sam was saying, against all odds in a way where like it's fighting against Sauron, but you literally can't win.
Like a million
like
to
you
one, yeah.
you and obviously and that's how it is in Lord of the Rings also, and then Providence kind of leads them along the way. But it even feels more hopeless in Berserk. But the second half doesn't feel that way. The second half is
that's because of the
incredibly.
elements they introduced.
Well, let's
No, I know.
let's put a
Yeah.
pin in this,
yeah.
and we'll do a couple episodes here in the future where we'll do another kind of more in-depth discussion that we try to be as spoiler-free as possible, and then we'll maybe do another one that's
Spoiled.
We'll do a spoiler
where we
alert.
just don't listen to this if you want to read the book. So briefly, because we've only just started it, but tell us a little bit, Daniel. You brought Hunter x Hunter to the table, and I know this one is very important to you.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about why that is.
So we've read like officially all together. We've read through chapter 38 of the Hunter x Hunter manga, but I think I watched it. It was on Netflix at the time, and I watched the sub of Hunter x Hunter. There was a moment it was like being promoted on, it was probably because of things I'd watched, but it was being promoted, at least to me, on Netflix. And it was the scene of Gon hunting the fish and pulling him out. And it was basically just that scene where he catches the monster fish. And I was like, this looks really interesting. And honestly, because it was called Hunter x Hunter with the X in the middle, which you don't pronounce, I thought it had something to do with Monster Hunter, which the game,
sure.
which I've never played, but I've heard good things about. But so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Then I started watching it, and then I thought the fish was one of the monsters, and then was just totally confused, to be honest, and just started watching it and liked the first episode, was hooked, and was like, this is very interesting. Kept watching, and the characters get introduced. The world is very quirky. And it's like, okay, this is very strange, and it just keeps developing episode by episode. And then you get, in episode 3 or 4 now where there's like magical beasts that are shapeshifters, and it's like, wait, a what? And then that was very surprising. But I was just like just delighted by how silly and strange everything was and off kilter. And then they get into the actual hunter exam, and all of a sudden they're like just walking a lot. And I was like, I was just like, this is just so bizarre. And from there, like every step of the way, it was just like, this is just so weird and quirky until we finish the exam. And then there's a tournament. They're fighting, and like, okay, this is something I'm a little more used to. But even that was handled in a very weird, character forward, strange way. Mm-hmm. And then in the kind of next arc, which we're currently reading this month, is where it's funny how it sort of becomes more of a traditional fighting manga to some degree, but also then again totally puts that on its head in the way the sort of power system and structure works. And again, I say magic system. It is a system, but it's not a system actually at all. Where one of the things I really love about Hunter is, with exceptions, it is not a power levels manga or anime. It is all about creativity and ingenuity, and your character and your will to fight and will to think things through and be prepared. That's just as important as just being like really strong. So it's kind of, it's not the antithesis of DBZ, but it really is putting the DBZ thing on its head, where and again, there's no I'm not disparaging at all Dragon Ball Z, which is awesome and was a revelation in the and something beloved by me. But it's all about who's the most powerful and how bad they want to win. And then it's just like punching a bunch, and then someone's going to do a Kamehameha or whatever thing, and then they win, by finally leveling up and becoming stronger. And with maybe some notable exceptions in Hunter x Hunter, it's not that at all. And actually, you can be much weaker, but because you can outthink your opponent or creatively attack your opponent in an interesting way, then that is. But then also, instead of just fighting, there's whole story arcs where there's the mystical, magical, creative elements are just like so on their head.
Yeah.
That I still feel like I've never encountered really anything where it feels like a author was just like, it was just someone at their creative peak and just being like, I'm going to do something so silly and so, well, and not even, silly is not the right word, but like so just creatively explosive, while also having real deep emotional ties at moments, really, really evocative storytelling, while also just being so, just creativity. I feel like is the whole nature of the thing.
Awesome.
So yeah, I'm really pumped to be reading it with you guys, and honestly, I'm going through it actually reading, even though the story was pretty accurately told by the show overall, the anime.
Mm-hmm.
It is different. It is different reading it, and comes across wonderfully and differently. I'm really pumped to be going through it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm enjoying it. It's another one like the rest of these where I had no idea what was going on. I'm going into it totally blind,
love it.
and I'm enjoying it. And this is a good segue moment here to invite you, the audience, if you would like to read along with us in our book club. This is one of the mangas we're reading right now. Like we mentioned, we're finishing Berserk this month, but we're right here at the beginning of Hunter x Hunter. So. If you're interested in reading along with us, we're reading it all on the app, I think.
Shonen Jump.
So yeah,
on the Shonen Jump app.
if you want to get in, it's like $3 a month.
Yeah, it's real
so it's
cheap.
not, and then you can, even though we've already read the first few, manga's really easy to read. You can read a lot of it.
And so just for
swipe
anybody
right.
that's interested, we're reading through chapter 73 this month.
Yes.
So let's finish up today's episode. So we started this book club a little over a year ago. Originally, we were just kind of reading whatever we thought was interesting. We read the Book of the New Sun Quartet by Gene Wolfe. And then we read the first 3 books of The Black Company by Glenn Cook. We read Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King and Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut. And but then after that, we kind of, as we were thinking about the structure going forward and thinking about the potential of starting a show like this, we were also looking at kind of some holes in our fantasy, science fiction education, our knowledge.
Yeah.
And so we kind of decided to start structuring our book club almost like collegiate courses in various subgenres of science fiction and fantasy to kind of try to plug some of those holes. And the first one that we went with was sword and sorcery into heroic fantasy. And so we started with Tarzan of the Apes and Return of Tarzan by Edgar Rice Burroughs. That is not sword and sorcery, but we kind of counted it as a proto sword and sorcery, as an example of this kind of adventure pulp stories that were coming out in men's magazines.
One of the most compelling reads of my life is
absolutely phenomenal.
That first book.
And we'll come back and we'll talk about all of these in more detail in future episodes. But just to give you an idea of what we've been doing, we then read all 3 of the Del Rey edition collections of the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard. So we read every Robert E. Howard Conan story, which talk about highs and lows, but the freaking highest highs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really, kind of our start of sword and sorcery. And then we read The Broken Sword by Paul Anderson, which was a revelation. And we read
Phenomenal.
All of the Elric of Melniboné sagas.
They were
which
fine.
that's a conversation. And then we didn't read all of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. We read Swords Against Death, Swords in the Mist, and Swords of Lankmar.
Yeah.
And those again are from the Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser series by Fritz Leiber. Some of the funniest things I've ever read. Just
Genuinely.
absolutely phenomenal.
It's so silly.
And then we kind of started transitioning into heroic fantasy. You can kind of look at our understanding going through this is kind of Tolkienian fantasy and sword and sorcery fantasy kind of starting off and going in parallel directions as far as the development of fantasy as a genre.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get both of them starting to branch off in similar directions around the same time, around the 80s. And this is loose. But around that time, the genre shifting like we talked about a couple episodes ago. And into heroic fantasy, which almost kind of starts melding some elements of epic Tolkienian fantasy with sword and sorcery. And we read the first 3 books of the Draenei Saga by David Gemmell. We read Legend, The King Beyond the Gate, and Waylander.
Legend.
Absolutely
So
loved
good.
those books. So much fun. Can't wait to talk to you guys about them in more detail. And we read the first 2 books in the Witcher series. We read The Last Witch and Sword of Destiny, both of those by Andrzej Sapkowski. Those are the 2 short story collections that take place before the main Witcher story.
Right.
And then, oh boy. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we returned to our Lord and Savior, Gene Wolfe. And we read The Wizard Knight. And I'm a changed man. And spoiler alert, the next few episodes are probably going to be about Wizard Knight.
Because it's too much.
God.
Too much good book.
And that leads us up to currently. We read Wizard Knight in May, so last month when we were recording this. And now we're reading as kind of our final entry in this whole series and our most modern series that we've read thus far as a club.
Yeah, when
Outside
is
of
this
manga.
written?
2014,
Yeah,
I think
that's
was when
super-
Malice
super modern.
came out. But we are reading The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, and I have read this series before. I absolutely adore it. If you've been listening from the beginning, it was in my top 10. It was number 5 or 6, I think, in my top 10. I can't remember. But super stoked to be reading this with you guys. It's definitely a phenomenal modern heroic fantasy. Ticks all of my trope boxes that I love. So that's going to deserve a conversation of its own. So if you're interested in reading along with us, be forewarned, we read a shit ton of books. So this month we are reading the first 3 books in this series. We're reading. I want to get this correct. We're reading Malice, Valor, and Ruin. That's the first 3 books. And then next month, we'll be finishing that out with reading Wrath, book number 4. And then we're super excited for those of you that are interested in following along, and we'll be talking about these 1 or 2 episodes a month as we start in July with the series that started us off with this whole idea of doing these series. We're going to be doing a deep dive into King Arthur. And when I see deep dive, I mean like a freaking year-long deep dive into King Arthur. Potentially longer if we also do our little Arthur-adjacent series of books. But we're going to be going through everything from Lemore to Arthur. That's about as far back as we're going. We're not going into any of the like literal medieval texts this time around. We're starting with Lemore to Arthur by Thomas Mallory and coming all the way through some of the more modern, historically accurate reinterpretations. I think finishing at this point with Bernard Cornwell's trilogy of Arthur books. So we'd love to have you guys read along with us. This has been far and away one of the biggest highlights of my last year is doing this with you guys.
Absolutely.
And so anybody out here listening to the show that wants to read along with us, we'll be posting up what books we're reading every month, and you're more than welcome to join us and join in the conversation. Yeah.
Please do. Yeah. We're
Let's read.
I'm pumped. I've loved the Arthur stories and whole thing, so it'll be really fun to like go deep into like looking at all the different iterations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could not be more excited about what we've read and what we're about to read. So, yeah, lots of great conversations with you guys to come up. Closing thoughts, gentlemen?
No, it's fun. I mean, anime is and manga and that whole Japanese style of storytelling is super meaningful, and it's fun to be sharing that both with you guys specifically, and then now anyone listening to this, and then it's awesome to be sharing our book club.
It is, but it's also like, I mean, you guys still aren't really in the club.
No, I know.
Like,
I know.
Here comes the elitism we were talking about.
I know.
But I think it's appropriate in this.
That's what I mean. Sharing a piece of it. Hey, this is what we're reading, and if you want to like,
I'm just saying it's sexy to start your own book club. So feel free.
Yeah.
If you want to pretend
start your own, then follow along with us.
If you want to pretend to be friends with us, and then listen to us talk about stuff,
we're talking about.
We want you to do that.
I don't think you know the real stuff we talk about. This is like the cookie cutter version of it.
It's true. Well, thanks, gang. It was great to have you guys out, and you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. For signing out for Steven, myself, Daniel, and Sam. Have a great one.
I did want. You can't see me because my camera has died, but my audio is going to keep going.
You can hear
me. I did want to give a special shout out. If you guys are enjoying the music, at the beginning and end of our episodes, that is our Hole Dweller.
Yes.
Phenomenal dungeon synth artist and musician, and we freaking love his music, and we're so stoked that we get to use it here in our episodes. So
absolutely,
if you dig it, link to his Bandcamp is in the show notes. Please go support him.